In this part of the blood lecture in Biology 160 in Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology, we will be talking about hemostasis, or, in other words, blood clotting. Hemostasis literally means stopping blood, and so this is a word that we use when we're talking about the clotting of blood. Whenever there's a break in a blood vessel, we have to have this hemostasis happen. If there's some problem with hemostasis, if we're not able to clot, then we're going to lose blood. If we lose too much blood, that's definitely going to be a problem. If you lose up to any blood loss is bad, but if we're losing between 50 and 30% of our blood, we're gonna have some problems. You're gonna start to see someone looking pale. You're gonna become very tired, very weak. If you lose more than 30%, then you're gonna go into shock, and it can become fatal. So losing blood is very bad. So we have this inborn mechanism that allows our blood to clot. So clotting blood is very important, but also keeping blood from clotting when we don't want it to clot is also very important. So there's a very complex mechanism, complex cascade that is involved in clotting blood. We're just going to go through a brief overview. We're not going to get into the real detailed part because it can become very detailed very quickly. So we're just going to look at the general parts of clotting, what's going on. So in general, whenever a blood vessel breaks, we have three main phases that happen. Number one, we have what are called vascular spasms. And what's happening here are the blood vessels are starting to constrict that blood flow so we can keep from losing too much blood. Next, we have platelet plug formation. So these platelets we've already talked about are going to come in here, and they're going to temporarily seal up that hole, form a plug so that the red blood cells don't continue to leak out. And then finally we have the actual coagulation of the blood, the actual clotting, the fibers. We're finally going to see the fibers, connective tissue fibers of blood coming out as fibrin is formed to help hold that blood and keep it from continuing to leak. So this process is going to occur as a break happens in that blood vessels. The cells around that break are going to start releasing chemicals. And those chemicals are going to trigger this vasoconstriction, or these vascular spasms, in order to keep from losing more blood. As this vasoconstriction occurs, this is going to trigger the platelets to start to form a plug. Platelets normally aren't going to attach to the blood vessel walls, which is a good thing because we don't want these platelets stopping and forming a clot anywhere. We just want it to happen where we've been injured, where those blood vessels have been broken. But when the blood vessels break, then the fibers underneath, collagen fibers underlying the blood vessel, are going to be exposed, and that is what the platelets start to attach to. So as long as you have a smooth blood vessel, platelets will keep flowing, but any break that happens, platelets are going to become sticky. They're going to start forming that spot, and they're going to form what's called a white thrombus, or a platelet plug. They're going to seal up that hole temporarily before clotting can happen. After that happens, now our clotting is going to start happening. So the platelets, once they start forming this plug, they're going to start releasing chemicals as well. That's going to attract more platelets, and it's also going to start this cascade of clotting. So platelets have a molecule called PF3, and this PF3 is going to interact with tissue factor, or TF, which comes from the damaged tissues. So PF3 and the TF are going to interact also with calcium and other clotting factors in order to create an activator called Prothrombin Activator, and this prothrombin is needed in order to produce something called thrombin. So prothrombin is activated and becomes thrombin. And then thrombin, in turn, activates fibrinogen to become fibrin. So fibrin is the actual fibers that form the clot. This is where we're trying to head to. Fibrinogen is always floating around in the blood. It's always available, but only when it's activated by thrombin is it going to become fibrin and start to form a clot. So normally it's soluble, it's not going to clot. So there's this large cascade that is happening here. So prothrombin activator activates prothrombin to become thrombin, which activates fibrinogen to become fibrin. That's then going to form the clot, going to seal up the wound, and that is the process that's going on here. And here you can see the fibrin being formed. It's holding those red blood cells in. As that fibrin forms, it's going to start pulling the edges of the blood vessels together, closer together, so that no more blood can get through. And eventually that will form the scab or the clot. And then eventually, as you heal, that's eventually going to be replaced with new cells as you heal up from the wound. But this cascade is very complicated. A lot of what we left out, so here notice it says, and other clotting factors. There's as many as 10 clotting factors in this cascade that all have to be activated in turn in order to get this whole clotting system running. And it's a very complicated system. If you think about why it's such a complicated system, it comes back to this idea of forming a blood clot. So a blood clot can be very dangerous inside our body. It's also very helpful. So it's very helpful to seal up wounds, make sure that we're not losing too much blood. But if we have clots forming where they're not supposed to, and they clog up blood vessels, that's going to make it so some of our cells are not receiving oxygen that they need, that life-giving oxygen, and so they're not going to be able to do what they're not going to be able to function. They're going to start dying. And so we don't want to get blood clots where they're not supposed to happen. And so this large cascade here, this very complicated cascade, makes it so that it's hard to accidentally initiate this whole clotting process to happen. So in order for it to happen, there's a lot of things you have to go through. And this is I believe this is a preventative measure to help us from getting too many blood clots where we don't want them. This usually happens in about 3 to 6 minutes, and eventually it's broken down as our clot repairs. There are times when we're forming clots that we don't want to form. So for example, there's something called a thrombus. And this is where we have an unbroken blood vessel, but we're forming a clot in that area. It may be because the blood vessel is rough. It could be because of the buildup of cholesterol and arthrosis inside our arteries that is making it so we're forming this clot. And it's a thrombus when it's stuck there. If that thrombus breaks away and starts to flow through the blood, it becomes an embolus. And an embolus can be very, very dangerous, because if it's large and it goes through the blood vessels will get smaller and smaller and smaller before they get back to the venous side, so in the arteries. And if it gets to a small artery that it can't get through, then it's going to clog up that vessel, and suddenly all the cells that are going to that area can no longer receive the oxygen they need. So for example, if this happens in the brain, if this thrombus flows through the blood, gets up to the brain, gets stuck in a blood vessel, suddenly we're cutting off oxygen to the brain. That we call a stroke. That becomes very dangerous. Thrombus can also be dangerous depending on where it forms. But again, in general, this is not going to happen. So we don't want clotting to happen where we don't want to. But places, for example, if you have pooled blood, so let's say you're not very active or you're bedridden, your blood can start to pool. If the blood is not actively circulating, that can become a problem and lead to this clotting, this unwanted clotting to happen. That's also, for example, when you ride on airplanes, they say you need to get up and walk around, get the circulation going, especially in your legs, because you can get blood pooling in your legs. And so you're riding on an airplane, you're sitting there, you form a thrombus, you don't know about it, can break off, become an embolus. Then when you stand up to get off the plane, that thrombus will break off, become an embolus, and suddenly you can have a stroke or something because you've been sitting on that plane for so long. So it's important to keep the circulation moving, make sure the blood isn't pooling and things like that. that is hemostasis and what's going on there.